The Blooderfly by Ralph Nedhier. My first indication that something was wrong was when I saw that the door to the exotic specimen lab was standing open. That was against protocol. The labs in this sector had negative pressure systems that prevent the spread of pathogens, and the doors are supposed to stay shut when nobody's entering or exiting. Going to the door, I looked in and saw Dr. Koch standing behind the workbench near the end where the centrifuge was. She was standing perfectly still, her arms held out a little from her sides, her shoulders hunched. She was looking towards me, but she wasn't looking at me. Her eyes were wide and vacant, her face set, her gaze a 1,000-yard stare. "Dr. Koch," I said, taking a step into the room, "are you okay?" Her eyes snapped to me. They widened a little, though from what emotion I couldn't tell, as the rest of her face remained still and white. Frowning, I came closer, trying to spot a reason for her odd silence. She didn't appear injured. There was no sign of blood on her lab coat. Was she sick? Was she having some kind of psychotic episode? "Doctor," I repeated, coming up so the bench was between us. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" Her eyes bored into my face, wide and stony. Then they flicked across the room, then back to my face, twice. "Look over there?" I looked, and immediately froze too as I saw the broken glass of the specimen isolation unit in the corner. It was a small unit, barely large enough to hold something the size of a pigeon, but that was plenty big enough. I swallowed and looked back at her. I understood her tenseness now, but not her odd stillness. "Where is it?" I whispered. Her lips moved, her tongue flickering behind her teeth. I leaned closer, bringing my ear close to her mouth. "What?"
"It's on my back,"
she breathed voicelessly. Oh. I backed away slowly, then moved down the workbench until we were at opposite ends. Leaning forward, I checked her back. Yep, there it was. I didn't know what it was, but there it was. My first impression was of a big black maple leaf stuck to her lab coat just below her shoulder blades. It was ragged and symmetrical, its pointiest end directed downward and its veined, ribbed surface shone as if wet. But then I saw what was at the points of the leaf, and my insides tensed. Each was tipped with a sharp black hook dug into the material of her lab coat. Claws, stingers. In this lab it could be either, neither, or both. I swallowed as I watched the thing hang from her back, utterly still. Bat, spider, tick. My brain cycled through comparisons as it variously interpreted the ribbed, leathery shape as folded wings, webbed legs, or a deflated sack of the body. I took an involuntary step back as one of the veins pulsed. Whatever that thing was, it was alive. And if Dr. Koch's frozen state was any indication, dangerous. For the moment, however, it wasn't doing anything that I could see. The hook seemed to be serving only to help it cling to her back, and the rest of its body was held far enough off the white cloth that I could see air between them, making it clear it wasn't biting her or laying its eggs in her. In fact, from its delicate stance, I got the feeling it was just as tense as she was, like it knew it had a tiger by the tail and was afraid to make a move. So, for the moment, they were in a stalemate. A stalemate I had to break. Slowly, so as not to startle it, I leaned back out of sight and took a deep breath. I wanted to go and get help, get someone more qualified. But the idea of ditching Dr. Koch in this precarious state turned my stomach. I had to do something, before the worst, whatever that was, occurred. I scanned the room. There was a long-handled net leaning against the wall, the kind used on collection trips. Picking it up gently, I showed it to the senior scientist and raised an eyebrow. She was the expert here, after all. Dr. Koch's eyes darted along the length of the tool. I could see her considering the situation, weighing the possible horrible outcomes. Then, ever so slightly, she nodded. "All right, then." Making as little noise as possible, I extended the net to its full length, locking the segments in place with a twist. The mesh was a heavy nylon fiber, hopefully strong enough to keep the thing contained, at least for a minute. However, I knew instinctively that I couldn't just place the net over it, not while it was still on the good doctor's back. No doubt its first instinct on being disturbed would be to strike at the living flesh beneath it. No, I'd have to coax it off her first, then net it. Coming around the end of the bench again, I reached out with the net, using one hand to steady the long handle and the other to guide it from the back. It was heavier than I expected and cumbersome. I miscalculated and bumped the rim against the back of her head. To her credit, she didn't flinch, but shut her eyes in a manner that breathed terrified exasperation. I winced on her behalf, then tried again, dragging the thick white net down the back of her head, disarraying her bun in the process. Slowly I moved it down her back, past the tense hump of her shoulders towards the waiting creature. I was a little surprised when it didn't react until the net brushed against it. Maybe it wasn't on edge as I had thought. Maybe I was just projecting my own tenseness onto it. Or maybe it just couldn't see all that well. I wasn't sure where its eyes were, if it even possessed any. But it definitely could feel. At the first brush of the material, the creature recoiled with frightening speed, collapsing like a tiny umbrella. I saw the lab coat bunch up between its talons, drawing it tighter across Dr. Koch's shoulders. She made a tiny whimpering sound and I froze, certain I had just sealed her doom. But the creature remained motionless, now a crumpled black cone jutting from her back. I could see now the ribs under its skin were knobby-knuckled articulated struts, validating my bat wings and spider with webbed legs descriptions. I could also see the wrinkled material between the struts pulsing in and out in a slow, measured manner. Breathing? A heartbeat? Or just preparing to strike? We all stood there motionless for a few seconds, me still clutching the net, the trailing mesh hanging just above the now alert monstrosity. Dr. Koch had at some point bent her head forward, perhaps in an attempt to keep the hair now escaping from her bun from coming in contact with the creature. I licked my lips, feeling cold sweat lubricating the net handle between my hands. I was doing this very badly. I wasn't used to working with live creatures like some of the other technicians, but I had to keep trying. Lowering the net, I let it brush the creature again. It struck then, suddenly and violently, snapping its whole body onto the thick white mesh with the speed of a mousetrap, the black talons clamping together like teeth. I was so shocked I dropped the net, fumbling it in my sweaty hands. The net fell but jerked to a stop as the creature's hind claws snagged in the fabric of Dr. Koch's lab coat. It terrified me to realize how strong it must be, hanging by its back legs as it held the massive net off the ground. "Doc," I started to say, but she was already moving, unbuttoning her lab coat with frantic speed and shucking it off behind her. The net clattered to the floor, the creature vanishing in the white folds of both it and the coat. I heard an angry, rattling hiss from inside the folded cloth.
Shut the door!
Dr. Koch bellowed, grabbing a nearby wastebasket and cramming it down on top of the shuddering heap.
Don't let it out!
I leaped to obey her, slamming the door and, inexplicably, locking it. Flattening my back against it, I watched with round eyes as the middle-aged scientist planted her full weight on the wastebasket, obviously doing her best to keep the thing within from burrowing out through the cloth.
Help me.
She gasped, her face drawn in a grimace that almost looked like laughter.
It's devilish strong.
Going against every instinct I had, I ran to her side and knelt, putting my hands tentatively on the steel surface of the wastebasket. To my consternation, I could feel claws scrabbling against the inside, scratching and gouging at the metal. "What do I do?" I gasped, pushing downward as hard as I could. "Tell me what to do."
Let me think.
Dr. Koch snapped, blowing a lock of hair out of her eye. She looked at the workbench.
Grab that dissection tray, quick.
I did, heedlessly scattering tools on the floor as I pulled it off the edge of the counter. It was one of those with a porous vinyl pad in the bottom for stabbing pins into, and I wondered if I should pull it out as I held it out to Dr. Koch. "Now what?"
Slide it underneath.
She instructed, clinging to the now bucking basket.
Quick. No, over the net.
Feeling both terrified and chastened, I turned the tray wide edge first and shoved it under the edge of the wastebasket, just as a shiny black hook slid out and dug viciously into the vinyl near my thumb. I squawked but kept pushing, feeling faint as I saw some clear liquid squirting from where the hook pierced the pad. Venom? Digestive enzymes? Or was the thing bleeding? I kept my fingers clear as the tray slid underneath the frenzied monster, and then it was trapped in an iron prison, the wastebasket on top, the tray beneath.
Good.
Dr. Koch said, sitting down firmly on the upended wastebasket so that the sharp metal edges drove down into the vinyl pad.
Now quick, run across the hall. Grab another containment unit, fast.
I stood but hesitated. I could hear the creature clawing or gnawing or something at the inside, and I could see the dented sides of the wastebasket deforming. Whether from her weight or the creature's efforts, I couldn't tell. "Will that hold it?" I asked nervously.
I don't know. That's why I said fast.
She yelled, and from her voice I could tell she was certain it was going to come clawing up underneath her at any moment. Heart pounding, I ran to the door and slipped out, her cry of,
"And keep that door closed,"
ringing out behind me. There was no one in the storeroom when I got there. It's not really a storeroom, more just a lab nobody was using for anything that we decided to use to store our large equipment. There were rows of containment units in the far corner, different sizes, and I frantically tried to remember the size of the broken one as I picked my way through empty tanks and bioreactors. Was it a 10-liter or a 20? Deciding to err on the side of speed, I grabbed a 10 and lugged it back across the room, silently cursing whoever had decided to put the EO containment units behind everything else. I struggled not to drop it as I reopened the door to the lab. Dr. Koch was still sitting on the wastebasket as I came in, her face white and drawn. She looked up as I shut the door and hurried over.
Good. Perfect.
"Is it still in there?" I quavered. I couldn't hear it anymore.
Yeah, it's just gone quiet.
She said tersely, glancing down.
I think it's getting tired.
Slowly she stood up, keeping her hands pressed down on the wastebasket as she stealthily knelt beside it. The wastebasket remained silent.
Okay, open that up and turn it on its side.
I did, wincing as the glass canister clinked against the floor. What now?
Scoot it closer.
She muttered, still keeping her hands pressed down on top of the basket.
Put it right by the edge there. Okay.
She spared a hand to grab her discarded lab coat and drape it over both wastebasket and the mouth of the containment unit.
Okay, tuck that under the edges there. Kind of make a tunnel, yeah, like that.
You're going to let it out? I whispered, realizing what this was leading up to.
Yep.
She muttered, drawing a deep breath.
I'll tip the can back, and hopefully it'll move toward the light coming through the glass sides of the unit. As soon as you see it in there, push the lid shut, okay?
I swallowed but nodded, hovering my hand over the lump in the cloth that I knew was the edge of the swinging cap of the unit. Okay.
Right.
She brought her feet beneath her, rising into a crouch.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
She tipped the wastebasket backward and braced herself. Neither of us breathed as we watched for signs of movement beneath the cloth. For a moment, there was nothing, but then the wastebasket juddered as something slid out from under the rim, and a ripple went through the lad coat as the creature shot out. I braced myself to run, certain it was going to come scrabbling out not into the unit but right up my pant leg. But then I felt the glass vibrate under its hard claws and it came unfolding out into the big glass jar. "Aha!" I cried, my voice cracking, and slapped the lid shut, leaping back as it ricocheted around in the containment unit like an angry wasp. Dr. Koch made a similar sound as she pulled off the lab coat and filled with the casing before lugging the container upright and setting it on its end. Sinking back down on the floor, she laughed raggedly, staring at the angry creature as it beat itself against the glass.
Ha ha!
She croaked, breathing heavily as she chuckled at it.
Hoo boy! Oh, holy catfish.
I felt a strange relief to see she was as shook up as I was. Leaning against the lab bench, I took long, slow breaths. Whew! Are you okay? Did it hurt you?
I don't think so.
She breathed. Leaning forward, she gestured at the back of the purple turtleneck she was wearing.
Did it get me? See any holes?
I looked closely. No, I think you're okay. I don't think it pierced your lab coat.
Thank goodness for that.
Dr. Coates shook her head, and then to my mild astonishment lay flat on her back on the tiled floor, breathing deeply.
Hoo boy.
She breathed, spreading her arms and legs as if she were making a snow angel. Her eyes went to me.
Good job, by the way, with the net and getting the unit. Way to handle a crisis.
Really? I said, smiling shakily. I felt like I was doing it all wrong. I was sure it was going to sting you or something when I was trying to get it off.
Yeah, well, so was I.
Dr. Coates stared up at the ceiling again.
If anyone's at fault here, it's me. When I walked in and saw the unit broken, I wigged out and ran over to look, and I didn't see it until it landed on my back. It must have been on the ceiling, and when I ran beneath, it glided down.
Glided? I looked at the creature, which had stopped its ricocheting and was now plastered against the side of the glass, pulsating angrily as it glared at us. Seeing it from the underside, it now reminded me of a butterfly. Veinous winged things spreading out from a narrow central body whose most prominent feature was a big reddish-pink sucker. Can it fly?
No, it's like a flying squirrel, gliding from tree to tree in a tomb environment.
Dr. Koch said, sitting up again, her back now filthy with floor fluff. Adjusting her glasses, she pointed to the sucker.
See the orbital disc? It can stick to smooth surfaces with bat, and uses the claws at the edges to climb rougher ones. When it gets high enough, it just lets go and drifts down. We think it's trying to look like a falling leaf to fool its hosts.
I did think it looked like a leaf, I said, even as I put together what she was saying. Wait, hosts? Is this thing an ectoparasite?
Yep, and a real nasty one.
Dr. Koch said with a shudder.
When it finds a host, it latches on when its oral disc and sucks their... Well, call it blood, though it's not exactly homologous. Worse, though, those claws are venomous, and once it gets its hooks in, you can't remove it without them releasing their payload as a farewell present.
I swallowed hard. Geez, what does the venom do?
In the hosts, we've seen necrotic lesions, muscular paralysis, and a slow, painful death.
Dr. Koch said.
That's in their natural hosts, though. In humans, well, I would have been the first clinical trial. But let's just say for the record that you saved my life, shall we?
My knees threatened to give out, and I leaned heavily on the bench. She noticed and patted the ground beside her.
Yeah, me too. Pull up a floor tile.
I sat down beside her, swallowing. Wow. Wow.
Uh-huh.
Said Dr. Koch, closing her eyes.
Just think, if it weren't for those pesky NDAs, you could tell all your friends that you saved your colleague's life today. Isn't that something?
Sure is, I said, still staring at the creature behind the glass. Its pulsating had slowed now. Did that mean it was calming down? I glanced over at the broken containment unit in the corner. Not to be a worrywart, but what's to stop it from breaking out of this one, too?
The fact that I just turned on the refrigeration and the internal temperature is now well below what this thing needs in order to remain active.
Dr. Koch answered, gesturing limply at the container.
Whoever locked up last night must have forgotten to do that. Somebody's going to be losing their job over this, I'll betcha.
I winced. Who, us?
Nah, we're victims. And problem solvers.
She took a deep breath and sat up.
Okay, breakdown's over. Time to seal this place up and call for a decon team to scrub Australian viruses and whatnot. Do me a favor and get a sample of that liquid it secreted in the tray, will you? Might as well glean something from this fiasco.
I moved to get a pipette as she telephoned the main office to report the incident and call for a decontamination squad. I glanced at the creature in the tank again, noting that it was now perfectly still. It really was quite small, only about the width of a spread hand. Amazing to think what a frightening effect it had had on us. "Hey, doctor," I asked as she hung up the phone. "What do you call one of these?" In case someone asks me what exactly almost killed me today.
Doesn't have a name yet, actually.
She said, coming over to the lab bench to lean beside me.
Still undescribed. Right now it's Exotic Organism 557-213B. Got any ideas for a common name?
I looked at its strange, alien-shaped spread eagle on the glass and nodded. I got one. You have been listening to The Blooderfly by Ralph Nadir. Thank you for listening. Thank you to 11 Labs for providing my sweet, sweet voice.
Mine too.